well. Thank you all for coming. So basically today what's gonna go down is we have two speakers, alhamdulillah. We have Sheikh Ubaidullah Evans, which I think you guys are all familiar with by now, alhamdulillah, and then we have Sister Fatima Knight. So we're gonna start off with a little mini lecture, and then basically it's gonna be a discussion and panel. So if you guys have any questions, if you have any comments, or if you just want to share, your thoughts about the Jummah curtain, or the Barda, as some of you may refer to it as, then this is your place to do so. So just a little introduction of our speakers. Sister Fatima Knight, she's a member of the first graduating class of Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. She studied under many luminaries, including Imam Tahir Anwar, Hakim Mizan, Imam Zaid Shakir, and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. She's now currently a graduate student in the Chicago Theological Seminary. And we're truly blessed to have her here as one of our esteemed teachers, alhamdulillah. And then Sheikh Ubaidullah Evans is the first scholar in residence for the American Learning Institute for Muslims. He has studied the religious sciences in several prominent institutions, both local and abroad, including Al-Azhar in Cairo, Egypt, and where he graduated from its Sharia program. Ustad Ubaidullah is also an instructor with the Ta'leef Collective and Inner City Muslim Action Network and the Institute for Islamic Information and Education. So that's just a little brief background, and then inshallah we're going to get started with Sister Fatima Knight.
They can probably hear me.
Yeah.
I hope. If not, then I'll grab the mic. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. First time at UIC, so I'm really glad to be here. So I'd like to start by saying that this is really not a quote-unquote fiqhi matter per se, in the sense that both versions of having the separation or not having the separation are allowed. So we kind of want to not just think about, what does the law have to say about this quote-unquote, because we know that Islam is more than just law. It's bigger than that. So, this is perhaps an ethical issue, maybe a cultural issue, and maybe at its very basics, just a space issue. So we want to keep that in mind. So then what we might want to think about, we might want to ask ourselves, what is an authentic expression of worship space for you? So I think each person should ask themselves that question. And, of course we're asking that question in our own way with the issue of the separation, or the purda, as some people might call it. But just really think about not just physically space. So not just physically, what does this space need to have in it for me to feel like it's an authentic worship space, but also how do you want the space to feel? Do you want the space to feel welcoming? Do you want the space to feel bright and lively, as opposed to dead, as opposed to you walk in there and you feel like it's tense, or you walk in and you feel like you're not particularly welcome there. So I think we should all think about more than just physically what we want in our spaces, but spiritually, and what do we want to feel when we walk into our spaces. Because in my mind, I think in a lot of ways, the answer to the question of whether to or to not have the separation it can be easily answered. In my mind, now obviously for some people it's not an easy question and it doesn't have an easy answer. For some people it's kind of like they have a lot that they want to say about it, or a lot that they feel about it. For me, right, and I'm not preaching this, I'm just saying how I personally feel. For me, I think there's a way to have some sort of partition, some sort of barricading off, where people feel more comfortable in that space, and then to have another space where people feel comfortable, or they prefer for it to be open, so that, as a woman, she can see the khatib can see her, and so I think there's a way to answer it easily, but I also fully respect what other people have to say about that. And from my own personal experience, I'll just say what I prefer so that I can be transparent, is that I prefer a space without a partition. that's my own personal thing. I'm not preaching that. Again, I'm not saying that that's what's best. I'm saying that's what I prefer, and I feel like in the spaces where I've been, where there have not been a partition, I've been able to develop some sort of, student-teacher relationship with the imam that I wasn't able to otherwise. Because if I don't see the imam during the Jummah prayer, then most likely I'm not going to walk up to him after the prayer. If I'm not seeing him on a regular basis, then I'm not really going to feel comfortable talking to him when I might need to. And another point that I think is really important is that I do think that men and women should have a space in which they can worship together. There should be some sort of, religious community in which both men and women are a part, and they feel, comfortable religiously. They feel like they can express themselves religiously. They feel like they have someone that they can, just ask for dua when they're struggling with something. Someone who, they can give well wishes to. Someone who maybe at times they can ask counsel from, and maybe even favors at times. And I think that's really important to cultivate that space, to cultivate a space of both men and women in which there's kind of a sense of religious accountability, where people are kind of on the same page religiously. And something that I think is a good example of that is, for instance, let's say if I have a younger brother who maybe I think is struggling religiously, and he doesn't have an older brother as an example. There's no one that I can really sort of call upon in my family circle to be like, can you just sort of take my younger brother under your wing because he's struggling right now. If I was in a healthy community where there were people of the opposite gender, where there were men who respected me religiously, who we came together at some points to worship together, then I might feel comfortable going to that man and saying, I have this younger brother, and I just really need someone who's like an older brother figure to take him under the wing. Next time you and the guys do X, Y, Z, can you invite him along? And I think that's a really healthy thing to have, to be able to call on someone in that time of need. So a spiritual community of goodwill that consists of both men and women, and it doesn't mean that you need to have a deep spiritual connection with every person in that community. No, it just means there needs to be, an idea that this is a community in which the people here care about each other. And so that can be fostered in many different spaces, and I think, on campus, in the MSA, in the Muslim student group that you have, that would be a really good place to foster a level of just concern for one another. And you're not going to really care about people if you don't see them, I think. So just to keep that in mind. So some sort of spiritual space that's meaningful. And if you want to think about it in the lens of, repelling harm and accruing benefit, which is kind of an Islamic law maxim, or lens by which scholars would view things, then again, the example I gave, where I have, a younger brother who's in harm, who I think could be going down the wrong path. If I have no one to turn to, there's no brother in the community that I feel comfortable with, that's kind of a problem. There should be someone who at least I feel like, I've seen this person on a consistent basis, they seem to care, so let me go to them. And that would be a huge benefit, I think, to have that level of companionship. Now, I also want to touch on the point of culture. And so, I think the point of culture, good culture, or what it does, is that it harmonizes our various sort of subcultures and our various, expressions of ourselves with the norms of the sacred law. So that's culture at its best. So, there's an example that Islam is like pure running water, and it doesn't have a color in and of itself. But when it flows through cultures, the cultures that have embraced it, it takes on the color of those particular cultures. And so there's this idea that, we should be able to bring to Islam whatever is good from our culture, and Islam has the ability to absorb that, and we should be able to authentically express ourselves with the best of our culture and with the best of our religion. And also that we should try our best to not repeat the kind of discord that we see oftentimes in our home mosque or in the places that we come from. I think it's very easy to sort of just repeat those models, even though they're dysfunctional, and we might know that they're dysfunctional, but it can be easy sometimes because that's what we're used to. But we should really try to have some level of self-determination about our spaces, so that we're not just repeating and copying what we know, but we're taking influence from the various streams of our lives and from the various places that we've been and that we come from, and we're using what from that experience works for us in the space that we're currently at. Because I think a campus space, a college space, is a great opportunity to foster a kind of culture that you may not have come from. You may have come from a kind of mosque culture that was maybe very unhealthy, and oftentimes it's in college that you find Muslims that you can actually relate to, and it's a time that you don't want to squander by sort of repeating the kind of discords that you might have come from in your other communities. And also the mark of a good culture is unity, not necessarily uniformity, but unity and consistency and well-integrated patterns of behavior, and a good culture also gives people tools for their own self-empowerment. So, for instance, even if after all of this, you guys take another survey and you decide what you want to do, even after all of that, if kind of the maximum benefit has been achieved, and there are still people who just feel like, no, I just can't vibe with this space, then we should be big enough to say, well, that's okay. Let me give you the tools to go find a space that works for you. We shouldn't be like, my Jummah or no Jummah, because that's not the best expression of ourselves and not the best expression of our community. We should try our best to, create something that benefits the maximum number of people. But if there are people who still stray from that, then we just say, okay, well, let me help you find a space that's comfortable for you. Because we want to be, accountable to people in a certain kind of way. Because if we feel no accountability, then we're not going to help each other. We're not going to leave room for each other. And then, so I talked about my own preference that I wanted to be transparent about in terms of just, the space that I prefer is a space that is open, that doesn't have a curtain. But again, I'm not preaching that. I'm not saying that is bond, that's what you have to do. But I do think there's something very important about sight, about seeing the people in your community. So for instance, I was thinking about how one of the major ways in which the scholars will define a sahabi, so a companion of the Prophet, is that they'll say it's a person who the Prophet saw them. So it's about sight. It's not even about they saw him, but about he saw them. So there's this very important aspect of sight. And they may have only ever met once, but there's something about the Prophet having seen them that brings them into this community, into this companionship with him and with the other Muslims that are there. And then we also have this aspect of visiting people, right? Visiting people, visiting our neighbors, visiting those who are sick. So we know there's something about presence, of being physically together with people, that has spiritual benefits that we might not be able to quantify, but it's qualitative. And it's good for us as a community and as individuals. And then I was also thinking about the concept of gazing upon our Lord, right, in heaven. That's the highest, the greatest experience that we can have in the next world is gazing upon him. And so just the importance of being able to see him, that there's something about that. There's something about that presence. There's something about sort of being filled up with the sight of someone else that is that can be very therapeutic, and especially if that person is God himself, then it has the utmost benefit. And then just a little bit about the Prophet's mosque. So we could say that it was kind of an inclusive space, quote unquote, in that, you know, men and women were on the same level, meaning physically on the same level, so like one floor. And to my knowledge, there was no divider. They were all under the same roof, men in the front, women in the back. And you know, that means that every Jummah, the Prophet, he could see everyone who was there, right? He saw the men, he saw the women, and it means that, you know, through doing that, he gains a sense of, I mean, he already had this sense, but he gains a sense of responsibility for the people that he is serving, right? Because he can see them every single week, and they can see him, so they feel validated in that exchange. And then also that means that there were women who, you know, witnessed sometimes miraculous events happened in those spaces. There were, you know, the weeping of the tree when the Prophet they had built a new minbar for him, and the tree stump that he used to use as his minbar started to weep, right? And so that means that both men and women were witness to that event. So again, you have this concept of the importance of sight, the importance of seeing things, that I think is really crucial. And then to just sort of close, I think, you know, you guys should all consider yourself blessed that you have the opportunity to ask these questions, and to create spaces that can accommodate you and your desires and what kind of practice that you want to have, because not everyone has that, and that you also have the resources to do that. And like I said before, I personally think it could be easy. I personally think you could have a space where there's a barrier and there's a space where there's not a barrier. But that's just me, and I don't want to put that on anyone else. But I do think that if that were to be the final result after all the dialogue and the new surveys and this and that, that there were two kinds of spaces, a barricaded space or a space with a barrier and a space without, if people were still very, very polarized, I would think that we need to examine something else, that maybe there's something else going on here. Mm-hmm. Because we don't want it to be like, you know, my way or the highway sort of thing. And if you have your space, a space that you want, then you shouldn't be projecting that onto someone else. So just like I like a space without a barrier, that's fine for me. I'm not going to tell people who have spaces with barriers that they shouldn't have them, because that might be great for them. And you don't want to, you know, in the name of trying to do what's right, you could actually end up harming people. So you want to make sure that we take everyone's opinions into account, and respect people and give people the benefit of the doubt that the views that they have may really be close to their heart, and that they may have really thought about the views that they hold. And then I would also say, you know, we shouldn't put power in the curtain or the lack of curtain, because the curtain can't do anything for us. The lack of curtain can't do anything for us. The curtain has no inherent power. We have to make sure that we're always, you know, assigning that power to God, and that if we have, you know, things that are going on that make us feel like we need the curtain or we don't need the curtain, then we should be bringing that to God and asking Him to make our spaces that are welcoming, spaces that are safe, spaces that are ethical, and try to put the power kind of back in ourselves and act in a way that's in accordance with our values, and our highest self, and not put power in having a particular object or not having a particular object. And I'll close with that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. I want to first thank Zaman who every time I see him, it's hard for me not to think that he's older than me. Because of course he is very mature and he also looks very mature. But my younger brother, Zaman, for inviting me. And each time I come, my son is talking to me now. Yes, son, just 1 second, we're leaving shortly. Each time I come and I serve this community, I'm always impressed with the kind of enthusiasm, the kind of participation, the kind of excitement around the activity of the MSA. And I think that you should be commended for that. In terms of this issue of a partition at Jummah, it really only became a question for me maybe in the last 2 or 3 years. Prior to that, it was something I just took for granted. You go to Jummah, there's a partition. You don't even think about it. But after I started delivering the khutbah, and I was delivering a khutbah once, and from the sisters section, there was just this endless chatter. I mean, I actually wanted to participate in the conversation. I wanted to say, no, her biryani is better than her. I mean, I could actually hear them conversing. And I just remember getting frustrated. And if it were just a regular talk, I might have even pulled a Miles Davis and walked out. Look, take my trumpet, I'm out of here, man. You know? But it's Jummah, you can't do that. And afterward, I thought about it. What would cause them to come to Jummah and then someone back there is hosting a talk show? And then it hit me because disembodied voices don't command attention. You see? Disembodied voices, they don't command attention. So it's almost like if we're doing whatever it is we're doing, and then something is broadcast on the PA. Maybe we'll stop and listen, maybe we won't. And I started to understand that this is not an intentional attempt to disrespect the khatib. This is an expression of not feeling completely connected to the communal worship, to the prayer, and to the khutbah. And it's something as a community we have to address because it has layers. See, many of us, we don't like to recognize it. But as men especially, and I will speak for myself, because I know everybody here is a nice man. Sometimes we have issues recognizing, acknowledging, and holding up the personhood and agency of our women. And this is mukhalafat sunnah. This is something that is in flagrant contradiction with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet went and took bay'ah from people, we're talking the bay'ah of Aqaba or the bay'ah of Ridwan. He took the bay'ah from men and he took it from women because they have their own voices. They can speak for themselves. You don't just take their vote or take their bay'ah means allegiance. I know sometimes, we get in these spaces, we just start speaking all kinds of Arabic. Nobody knows they can't bring forth one kitab with any dalil about the rububiyyah of the Rabb al-Alameen. That's all I'm saying, But bay'ah is allegiance. No, they have to give their own pledge of allegiance because they're people. They're valued members of this community. And sometimes the way that we conduct our affairs in community is not reflective of that kind of respect. Once the Prophet ﷺ, he's sitting with a group of his male companions, and a woman from the Ansar, she comes to him, and she addresses him very assertively, and also very eloquently. And she's saying to him, we hear all of this stuff about men. What about women? Men have access to you. What about women? Men are studying with you. What about women? The first thing the Prophet does, ﷺ, is he steps back and he asks. And ironically, he asks Umar, what do you think about this? Like this woman coming and addressing me very assertively and very eloquently. And Sayyidina Umar responded, honestly, wallahi, I did not know that women could do that. Not because he's a male chauvinist pig. This is Sahabi Jaleel. This is an illustrious companion of the Prophet ﷺ. But in his experience, he did not know that women had that kind of capability. He was a Qurayshi man. Women really didn't have that kind of social presence. Their role was mostly domestic. So it was something new for him. And the Prophet ﷺ simply responded, yes, women, yeah, they do that. It's not, it was nothing new for him. And then he granted that woman's request. So again, I'm not here to say, a partition is the worst thing in the world. Because I also recognize the pervasiveness and the ubiquity, taking you back to all your ACT words. Get your binders out. Get them out. The pervasiveness and the ubiquity of the male gaze. It's everywhere. I mean, I see it myself now. And I'm saying this as a Muslim husband of a woman and a Muslim father of a young girl. Everywhere you go. All over campus, all over the streets. And that is inherently disrespectful. And to want the prayer space to be a place that I don't have to worry about that. I can come here, focus on my worship, and not worry about who's looking at me. And how they see me is also a concern that I identify with. Now, my personal preference, although I don't really have a personal preference because I'm not a woman, but my personal preference is that we have spaces that have both options. Either you can come, sit in a general seating area, or you can sit behind a partition, and I think this can be solved very easily. But I recognize that this is among those handful of issues that have been elevated to sacred status, even though in any book of law there's only 1 or 2 sentences about this, if that. But because it has symbolic, importance. It's kind of like, do you or don't you? Kind of like the Biha question. Are you Z? And as soon as the person responds, everything you need to know about their Islam, you feel like you know. Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. Do you shake hands? Or don't you? Oh, do you shorten your trousers? Or don't you? And these issues really, even to attempt to gauge other Muslims in that way, it's a type of delusion. You should be much more concerned with gauging your own behavior and your own intention. But even injecting these issues with this kind of symbolism is crazy. So what I think we need to do is give women the opportunity to choose, right? By way of voting, by way of surveying, if possible, if the space can accommodate it. I don't see why we can't have 2 areas. If the space can't, then of course, I'm not down with the Islamofascism. Democracy should rule. We want to benefit the greatest number of people affected by the issue. And I think for the men, this is where you get an opportunity to experience what it means to live in community and to have some of your chauvinism work through. And I don't mean anti-female chauvinism. I mean just thinking, my way is always right. My way or the highway. If they don't do this the way that I want it done, I won't come to Jummah. This is not a store that you're denying your patronage. This is worship with the Muslims on your campus. This isn't, I thought Walmart was rolling back the prices. I don't like that price. I'm not going there. This is an opportunity for you to display some high-mindedness. What we call in Arabic, rahmu sadr. Some high-mindedness, some open-mindedness. There was a scholar. His name was Ibn Taymiyyah. And people know him for being very strict. Ibn Taymiyyah played no games. Really about everything he played no games. But particularly about what he felt was sunnah. Right? But he said, the positions I disagree with, I practice them sometimes in private. So that when I encounter someone that has a different position than me, I can engage them with no ghil, with no rancor in my heart for them or the position they hold. I just want the truth to prevail. And that's where we need to try to be spiritually. So for the men, let's recognize the agency of our sisters. Let's recognize their right to choose, whether they choose to have the partition or choose not to have the partition. And let us be open-minded, high-minded, understanding people that can accommodate opinions that are different than our own. And beyond that, I think the issue is insoluble. What do you want to do? So I guess we'll open for some questions, inshallah.
Alright, so inshallah, if anyone has any questions, you can either stand up, raise your hand, get my attention, or I have note cards and pens here up, so I can pass those around too if you're not comfortable with speaking up. Yes, Lena.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, it's like half question, half comment, and I mentioned this before to Hussam, who's on Shura. There are two things about this discussion that really, they bother me. That's what it is. They bother me. So the first, I'm gonna try not to rant. The first one is I'm also gonna try to make this appropriate. So there are from my limited experience, I don't attend every week, but from my limited experience at Jummah, every single time that I've went, there are some of the brothers who are towards the back. So like the part of the way that we have it set up, it's kind of like this chair where the bottom is open and then the top part is the part apart. So I see the bottom and I don't see the top, which is the exact opposite of what I would like. But yeah. So so some of the brothers don't wear pants that go all the way up, and then like we have to see parts of their body that I'm not interested in seeing. I don't think I need to I don't think I need to paint a picture. I'm sure you guys understand. Yeah, so we've brought this up before, and it's kind of like it's like a semi-joke, you know, going around, and it's funny, like, oh haha, whatever, but it's actually not funny, because like there's no difference of opinion on whether or not it's okay for me to see that, but there is a difference of opinion, or both positions are accepted in Islam of whether or not there should be a parda. But yet it's so frustrating that, you know, we as a community insist on keeping the parda up. We make sure that stays there, but we don't fix that other huge problem that's very distracting during Jummah, and I don't want to see it. Like, it makes me really uncomfortable, and it stops me from going. So that's my first problem. And my second problem is that a while ago we had a discussion on Facebook, and it was the infamous parda argument. And I myself don't like the parda, but I did see on both sides, pro parda and anti parda, arguments that weren't exactly going along with Islam. Like, for example, I'll start with my side. So some people that didn't want the parda would argue, both men and women would argue, like, oh, it's a good opportunity for like men to struggle against their desires at Jummah. And no, I'm not saying I want the parda to be removed because I want to be a man's practice trial. You know, like that's not the that's not the point of not having one. And then on the flip side, someone would say, no, I do want the parda because, like, back home in Pakistan or in Palestine or Syria or whatever, like, the masjid that I attend does have one, so that must be right. And that's not a good Islamic argument either. So I want that whatever we do choose to be like something chosen from a point of like being educated about the issue, or being flat out and saying I feel this, as opposed to something that doesn't correlate, or doesn't correspond to the Islamic position.
I mean, I feel like the first issue is just kind of like, I think we all know, generally speaking, how we should dress when we're going to Jummah. So I think maybe we just need to be more conscious of that. And it kind of reminds me, like, in a lot of masajid, you'll go and there'll be like an extra kind of like prayer skirt for the women, who I guess the judge of the masjid thinks are not dressed appropriately. So I don't know if we need to have that for, I hope not. I mean, I think we're grown-ups, right? We know, like, okay, well, after a while you figure out how you should dress so that when you sit a certain way or you stand a certain way or you bend a certain way, you're not showing things that you don't want to be showing. And then I think with the second issue, I think you're absolutely right. We should be really sincere about where we're coming from when we talk about these issues, and just like, I mean, I hope I'm being sincere, but just like when I'm talking about, what I prefer, that's what I prefer. I'm not saying Islam says we can do that, but I also said to a certain degree, Islam says do either one that you want. We have agency, right? We have these rules, we have our ethics. We're supposed to use those and be productive people and figure out what works for us. Assess our situation and see what's the best option. So yeah, the whole, this is where I come from and this is what we do is not a good argument. We all come from different places. They're all equally, whatever, great or horrible. I don't know. But they're, no country is better than the other, except if you're talking about Mecca or Medina or something like that. But even still, they're not better in the sense of just because you're from there, you know what's right. So I think we're also grown-ups in that sense, and we know that that's not how we should settle our issues. And so yeah, there are those two aspects of let's make sure we're approaching this in a way that's Islamically sound, which means with the law of Islam and with the ethics of Islam and the spirituality of Islam, and that we're being honest about where we're coming from.
And it was a beautiful answer. I mean, it suffices, but just a few things that just come to mind is this issue you're talking about the inappropriateness of some of the men's dress at Jummah. I think it's a very serious one, because what it says is that as a community, we see it as our job to police the behavior of women, but we don't see it as our job to necessarily police the behavior of men. And if women have any role in our community in the minds of some men, it is simply to be the bearers of our purity. Look, she can't come around because it makes it hard for me to be X, Y, and Z. Well, if you have that much difficulty controlling yourself out of doors, perhaps you should stay home. And somebody can, like live stream you into the Jummah, and I can't go out for Jummah right now because it's just too crazy for me, right? So it does speak to that paradigm, and we need new paradigms. And if a man is coming through the door like that, something should be said to him just as readily as something is said to a woman. Coming into Jummah in dressed in a way that perhaps is inappropriate. As far as the second question goes, no, I don't think that we're trying to make Jummah like a testing ground for if you can exhibit some self-control or not. It's like, what are you going to do today? I'm going to go to Jummah and see if I can, pull this off. Last week was a tough week. Exactly. I took an L last week, but I'm going to come back and really lower my gaze and really get them this week. It's not a testing ground. I think that just strikes me as a bit odd. But we do need spaces where we can practice a kind of modesty that is consistent with how we lead our lives regularly. Because the kind of modesty that exists in the Muslim community now, much of it is performance. Much of it is, we get in the company of Muslims and we pretend that we have this sensibility. Oh my God, okay, I can see her feet. I can hear her voice, oh my God. And when you see him later with his colleague, he's like, oh, Jenna, I love that floral print on you. Did you get that from Forever 21? That looks fantastic on you. And how he reconciles that kind of dissidence, that he can have a conversation with a colleague and then he can go to Jummah. I think it's because we haven't created spaces where there's a modesty we expect people to observe here that is the exact same as what you're going to observe at work, observe at school. So no, not a testing ground. But I don't agree with making Muslim spaces these spaces where it's like, okay, time to perform. Everybody get in Muslim face. So it's like you're on the phone, okay, Muslim face time. Stuck for the wall. I don't agree with that either. So no, we don't have to make it like Hunger Games Jummah, but Muslim spaces should be a place where you can practice modesty that has more applicability than simply in Muslim spaces. You know, and this is a society where most institutions are co-ed. So, what will you do? What will you do? I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does.
I believe that.
Thank you both.
Okay. What about that guy back there in the gray shirt? Yeah, does he have a question? No, no question. Okay. No, what is that? But I'm with you, man. A lot of stuff comes through the door for the brothers in Jummah. We gotta start policing that stuff, man. Short shirts,
It's disgusting.
dirty socks,
It's disgusting.
garlic breath, just yes.
It's not so much a question, but a comment I wanted to make. So we were actually talking about this with the girls, and we were saying that if there's both, you know, they're saying that you'll get judged if you sit like, you know, not behind you. You're like, oh, you're that girl. And I just wanna, you know, how do you suggest people about, you know, normalizing this?
I mean, that's kind of tough because if someone's going to judge in that way, then I don't know if there's anything I can say to stop them. So I think that's a kind of a personal struggle that person should work through in trying not to be so judgmental, especially about something that there's no need to be judgmental about. So I think if we're clear on that it's not, whether you sit behind it or you're in the space without it, it's not a litmus test for your religiosity. So as long as we're clear about that, then hopefully for the sensible among us, which I hope is most or all of us, then we won't get into this weird judging zone. But there are certainly people who are going to judge regardless because maybe they're just not willing to listen to reason, or maybe they haven't been convinced. I don't know. So you can't always account for everyone and how they're going to take things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, I do understand how the judgmentality of some does add this, I mean, ultimately we want Jummah to be spiritually uplifting. We want it to be enjoyable. We don't want it to be like red or green pill, But I think, when you make a decision, sometimes courage dictates that you have to be ready for the consequences of your decision. And you should feel comfortable no matter what you choose, because both, I think, are not only deeply rooted in Islam, both express very healthy concerns on behalf of community members. And sometimes we do things just to show that there's latitude. Sometimes I might not be that person, but I want to show someone there is latitude in this issue. So, for instance, shortly after the demise of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, Abdullah ibn Umar and Ibn Mas'ud, they started coming out to pray the 2 units of prayer before Fajr in the masjid, even though the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam is to pray those 2 units of prayer at home. That's the sunnah. But they started to come to the masjid to pray it. Now, maybe someone was judging them. Wait, so you're doing something different than the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? But they had a very clear intention. No, we feel that people are forgetting these 2 rakat. People are forgetting to make these units of prayer, and we're doing this to remind people and they were content with that. So whatever came with it, however people saw them as, are you guys innovators? We know why we're doing what we're doing. And a person that chooses that, I'm going to sit here because I want to remind people that we have voices, we have agency. Everything that Sheikha Fatima said about vision, these things are very important. This is a part of our tradition, and I'm here to remind myself of that and also others. There's nothing wrong with that. And if someone isn't mature or sophisticated enough to recognize that, why are we concerned with their opinion anyway? I mean, really? You know what I'm saying? Zaman.
I was wondering what you guys think would be the role of the brothers in such a conversation. How much of a voice do you think they should have in this issue? I was discussing with Ustad Fatima earlier, and how we distributed the initial survey amongst the sisters only, and how after this event we were planning to also just distribute a survey gauging only the sisters' opinions. And she said that maybe we might want to consider that getting also the brothers' input into the matter as well. So what do you both think we could discuss about what is the voice of the brothers on this issue?
Yeah, so I think that, we want there to be balance. And I think sometimes in our trying to achieve balance when we're already in unhealthy or imbalanced situations, then we might have to go to a kind of extreme to tilt the balance in order to get back to some place that has an equilibrium. And so I could understand if in this particular situation maybe men or maybe women have not been heard at all, and maybe if it was just the men who were voicing their opinions. But it seems like women have been talking about this, and that they're talking about this and it matters to them, and they've been having the forums to do so online. And so personally I feel like no one should be left out of the conversation, in terms of the people who this affects, because we want to be respectful of what people have to say. And I think the brothers should, I think ultimately the decision should be in the hands of the sisters, but I also do recognize that this could be affecting brothers too in some way. I mean, I think less so, but if there are brothers who maybe they're also used to being in a space where there's a divider, and they're not used to seeing women in the masjid. So maybe it's touchy for them too. So I would feel like they should have some sort of voice, but I do think the emphasis should be on the sisters. And but in the future, we should aim to have some sort of balance so that whenever we're talking about issues that affect all of us, then all of us have a say, and we're not leaving people out intentionally.
Yeah, and I would definitely second that. I think brothers certainly should have a say, but I think their say should be secondary, and the sisters' say should be primary. I think that brothers should have a say. I mean, they do attend the Jummah, but I think this is an area, where brothers should be willing to actually defer to those really affected by the issue. And I think that's how I feel about that. My Habib. So
I guess my question is, say majority vote is to be that there is no barrier, right? So what would be in terms of brothers, what would be the behavior towards our sisters when there is no barrier? Is it okay to acknowledge them? I don't mean to ignore. I don't mean that like, oh, we're gonna ignore them. But is it okay if you see a sister that you know to say assalamu alaikum and then take a place and sit down? Or is it that we for those of us who can't control our gaze, we obviously just look down and probably not acknowledge them. Mm-hmm. But for those of us who maybe can do that, is it okay to say assalamu alaikum to a sister that we might know and then take a place to sit down?
I think this is one of those things that is really only taught through culture. we know that ghad al-basar, or lowering the gaze, is something Allah Ta'ala has commanded of both men and women. It's a virtue. However, practicing that virtue with grace is something that takes lots of time. And it's an intense period of almost calibrating. And you go through phases. Sometimes you might feel that maybe in my manners I'm becoming too lax, so that I engage too much frivolous conversation without necessity, because I'm just trying to get calibrated. Other times you might feel I'm actually treating this woman as though she doesn't exist. And that is very, very painful. And it's something that we would not do outside of a Muslim space. I guarantee outside of a Muslim space, we would never do something like that. If a classmate, a colleague, a neighbor, a friend came and said, hey, good morning, there's no way you'd say it. You would simply say, good morning. And you would, keep it moving. So I think that in terms of giving the greeting of salam, the legal opinion about giving the greeting of salam is that it is not impermissible to give a woman to whom you aren't married or related the salam. However, in a strict legal opinion, she doesn't have to return the salam. That's the opinion of the Shafi'i school. She doesn't have to say wa alaikum salam. If if she doesn't, you shouldn't take it as like, she didn't return my salam. She mad? She didn't return my salam. What? She didn't return. Right? But it's not impermissible for you to give that salam. But if she feels uncomfortable, she doesn't have to respond. And it's similarly, it's not impermissible for her to also extend a greeting of salam. And I think too, in as much as we exist in community, there has to be room for some kind of cordiality. Not, hey, what's going on? I saw you on campus yesterday, you were really fly. But, we have a very small community, and Allah Ta'ala describes us as awliya. We're friends of each other. They're friends of each other. So we have to look after each other. And to do that, we have to at least know each other. Be, familiar enough with each other that, like Sister Fatima was saying, if, her brother was struggling, she'd just say, hey, Zaman, whatever the brothers are doing, could you just be sure to link my younger brother into that? So there has to be community in that respect. And for a lot of guys, just like, this isn't that hard. I don't know when this became like, it's explosive to say hi. Wow, what have we created that it's like, to say hi is explosive? No, I mean, it's, just don't be a creep. Mind your manners. Be respectful. Fix your gaze. Be respectful. And, just bottom line, and this is all I can say because I have to go pick up my daughter, don't be a creep. Giving salam is different than, giving salam and looking up and down and wiping your brow, and fixing your hair, and just just good manners, man. We know these things inherently, good manners. If Ustadha Fatima wants to continue, I think that would be beneficial for the entire assembly. I don't want to sign your tie, right? But I actually have to take off, inshallah. So thank you for having me, inshallah. This thing's coming down. I'm like in full interior decorating mode of my house. So it's just getting to me. You see what I'm saying?
Sister Fatima, I think we have 2 questions and 2 comments. I'm going to start off with the questions. The first one's actually addressed to Unveiled evidence, but I know he's leaving. But it just says, some guys dismiss the argument of the parlor because Jummah isn't fard for women. Do you feel this is valid?
No. Jummah isn't fard for women, but the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tamna'u ima'illahi ta'ala min al-masjid." Don't prevent the female servants of Allah from the masjid. So even though it isn't fard for them, restricting them is haram. Restricting them is haram. So I don't see how the fardiyya is effective here, but that's just my opinion. Whoever asked the question, we'll talk offline, inshallah. I gotta get out of here for my daughter.
The next question is, how do we keep the same debate from coming up every single year? And how do we keep the choice made now to stand for the next several years, if not more?
Well, I mean, I think we should be willing to be flexible. So in a few years, none of you are going to be here. So I think, the people who come in should have some sort of say as to what they want the space to be, and we should be open and flexible enough for that. But I think the way to maybe prevent so much fluctuation all the time is to be really clear about why you came to the decisions that you came to. And for, people who are here, when the next class comes in, to say, this is why we chose this. So to actually know why you're doing the things that you're doing. Otherwise, then yeah, you'll just keep switching things up because you don't even remember why you're doing it in the first place. So just to be really grounded in your actions and why you deliberately chose to do this. Because you're all here, you're all going to deliberately choose something soon enough. So just to not forget that, just to not forget you volunteered to give your say, give your opinion.
Okay, thank you. And then we have two comments from the sisters' side. The first one is saying, I am pro the curtain because of the issue of space. Jummah can be very crowded to the point that the barrier is the only thing between the guys and the girls. And if the curtain is removed, we would be too close during Salah. So that's just a comment. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that should be taken into consideration, that if it really does get to the point where there could almost be people touching or like almost sitting on each other, then yeah, well, you need some sort of barrier there. Although I'm not even sure a curtain, and if you need something that was actually a bit more physical, something that had some mask. If you just have a curtain, I could still be touching someone with a curtain between us. My knee could still be on someone's back with a curtain between us. So there has to be some other way to prevent that. And like you said, if the see-through part is on the bottom, that really doesn't make any sense. At least it should be flipped the other way, because there's no reason why you should be seeing the guy's back, but you can't see the khatib. Like, what's more relevant there? So just in terms of space, I don't think a curtain really even solves that issue. I think there should be something that has more mass to it.
All right, second comment is also from the sisters' side, and firstly, I'd like to thank the MSA for opening up this space for discussion. However, I'm concerned with what will happen after this is over. Surveys for the sisters have resulted in a majority of pro-Farda opinions, but I think many of the sisters who would prefer no partition have stopped taking part in surveys because they've seen no results.
I mean, I don't have enough knowledge about the student population here and what the sisters have to say overall to be able to comment on that in the best way. But I do see that was something that I thought about in terms of, well, if there are women who are just kind of fed up with the way things are, maybe they're just not coming anymore. Maybe they're just not willing to participate in the conversation anymore, and that means that we should have had this conversation a long time ago if that's the issue, if people have already bowed out. So yes, I think those people need to be reached out to, and they need to be told that, hey, we're having this conversation again, and your voice does matter. And for the people who are, pro having no partition, then maybe they should be the ones who reach out to those sisters and say, hey, like, we have an opportunity here, we're going to talk about this, and I could represent you, but I would much rather you represent yourself. And now we've created a space where your voice really does matter, so please come, please vote, please participate. Because yeah, if there are a bunch of women who have already bowed out, then that means that we have a problem.
That's all the cards I have, so if anyone else has any comments, questions, concerns, this is your time.
I have a question. It's not about the partition itself, but Jummah as a whole. You guys talked about spiritual upliftment and stuff like that. And just wondering, like, how long was the khutbah itself during the time of the Prophet ﷺ? And how long was the prayer? Just because sometimes like, people come from work and stuff like that, and Jummah is like really rushed, and people don't really see the benefit in coming sometimes. And when Jummah, I guess, is supposed to be something that's communal, something that brings people together. So how would you combat that?
Can I ask, how long on average does the khatib usually give the khutbah? Like, how long does he usually go for? You know, I think the imam at NYU, Imam Khalid Latif, he has kind of a rule for himself that he only does 20-minute khutbahs ever. So he's mastered it, right? Because he knows people are coming from all over the city, and people have classes to get to, and there's no reason to be excessive about it. And as far as I know, I can't really tell you on average how long you know, the Prophet took to give his khutbahs, but some of them were pretty short. I think some of them were probably under 20 minutes. I don't know, Lena, if you want to help me out with that, but some of his khutbahs were very short. But I think he has the power to do that, right? Because he knows how to communicate to people in a way that's effective without having to be verbose about it. But you know, we're not the Prophet, so sometimes we feel like we have to kind of elaborate and give more and more examples. But there's a benefit to being brief, and the best kind of speech, like the Prophet said, and like he practiced, is speech that is concise, that's short, and that gets to the point. Because even though Jummah is a place where you kind of do revive yourself every week, it shouldn't be the only place. So, you know, I think sometimes it ends up being the only place, which is why oftentimes khatibs feel the need to be verbose and to really, I guess, you know, give people something to walk away with. But it's one of many spaces that we should have to be able to fulfill our spiritual needs. So I would say, yeah, on the shorter end in terms of length.
Do you feel that having a partition but also having a projector so that you can see the khatib but there's still like the partition is still there, do you think that solves the problem?
No. I think it's, well, I'm not saying no, but I think it's a solution. I think it's a solution, a viable solution. I don't think that a projector replaces a person. And, you know, I've definitely been in the masjid that I grew up going to. It was like that. We were in a separate room, but there was you know, a projector, a TV there that had the imam. And yes, it helps, of course, to be able to see him as opposed to just hearing him. But it's still not the same. There's still distance there. And I think we know the difference, like the difference between taking an online class and being in class with the professor. There is something that you miss out on, and you're not able to engage, I think, on the same level when there is the distance of a projector or a screen. So I think it's an option, but I don't think it's the best option for those who really feel like they get a more meaningful experience when they're seeing the khatib and you know, without a barrier.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It's not really a question, it's kind of like a thing. So I remember the first time I came to the private school at university, there was like barely any girls, and it seemed really, really empty. Or then we started to pray, and then you hear them go like, and me, it was so loud. I'm like, whoa, how many people are over there? I like what you guys were saying about having both options. I think it's probably the best thing that we should do. Is it off the survey?
Yes.
Yeah, and like I said, I think, you know, sometimes we get into this weird dichotomy, like Ustad Abdullah was saying, where, you know, our sort of notions of piety can be really weird. We feel like it's pious to not engage or to not see the opposite gender in places of worship, and it's better to engage with the opposite gender in quote-unquote secular spaces. And for me, that's actually the weird thing to do. It would be much better to be worshiping communally and to know the faces of the people in your community, whether that's, you know, in prayer. Obviously, you're not talking to people in prayer, but you're seeing them, and there is community there. The hearts are aligned in prayer, and yeah, definitely, I think the experience of hearing the men do this loud, robust Ameen, I think it's actually pretty moving, and I like that. I like that. I feel like it's a part of the experience. And just all these little things that we should really make sure that we're at least engaging each other on the worship level. That should be where we're definitely making sure that we have community. it's in the outside spaces where things can get more questionable. We should feel comfortable in our message and in our worship spaces with one another.
Anything else?
Okay, this isn't really a further issue or a barrier issue, but one of the brothers asked us a long question, and a lot of times, like between the same genders, like during the khutbah, sisters will walk in and then they'll start like hugging people while the khutbah is going on, like saying salawats. Is that proper, like something that you should do in Friday prayer?
Not really. So usually, yeah, the best etiquette is that, especially if you're late. So if the khatib has already started, then really you should get in and just sit down, because even, the scholars say you're not even really supposed to take notes while the khutbah is you're just supposed to be really directing your attention towards the khatib, towards the message that he's trying to give. And if you're standing up hugging people, then that's obviously distracting. So you don't want to do that, especially if you're late. If you come early, then of course give your salam. You can give salam to someone who's sitting next to you. It's quietly, it's contained, but you don't want to make a scene. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? No? Is that?
Since we're on like sort of a tangent, like off of the porta, I just wanted to make the comment that I really hate the room that it's in because it's really, really claustrophobic. And like we had Jummah once in like a room upstairs in SCE, and there was like sun and stuff, and it was like so much better.
That's okay.
It should be on the agenda.
I agree too. It's very congested, and that's kind of why I personally I do not prefer the parda and whatever I've discussed that, but for us at UIC, because it's so congested, I definitely think something that's like here down would be beneficial because it's so like, but yeah, it's a very tight room. But I mean I get it, like we can't have anything.
I think
better.
the reason it's in that room is because I don't think we're allowed to get like many other rooms for the whole entire semester, but that one, like 302, we're allowed to get like once in a while, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's like the only room we can get consistent.
Yeah.
I think it's been in the Rathskeller for a really long time. It's fine. It's just yeah.
I mean, it's a
That's
blessing to
something
have a
to
lot
take
of
into
people in
consideration.
a space like that. It's really nice to have just a really alive space where it's full with believers. So, of course, it can be hot and sticky and gross, but but there's still blessing in the fact that there are so many people coming out.
Yeah, I just think it's something we should take into consideration when we're filling out the survey.
Okay, so any other questions from either side or comments? Nothing? Sure? Last chance. All right, well, if that's it, then inshallah we'll end here. Sisters, stay put because I have some surveys for you guys. And if for whatever reason you can't take it right now or you just prefer to take it on the computer, that'll be sent in the email.